The summer heat hung heavy over Dayton, Tennessee, in July 1925. The town's dusty streets bustled with reporters, photographers, and onlookers as if a circus had rolled into town overnight. But this was no carnival. This was the stage for a national showdown between science and faith, modernity and tradition. At the center of it all stood a quiet young schoolteacher named John T. Scopes, accused of violating Tennessee's Butler Act by teaching Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Yet behind the trial, larger forces collided. Politicians, preachers, scientists, and lawyers fighting to define America's soul. This wasn't just about one man. It was about what the nation should believe. Chapter 1. A Nation on Edge. By the 1920s, America stood at a crossroads. The Roaring Twenties brought jazz, flappers, automobiles, and radio, symbols of a country racing into modernity. But beneath the sparkle lay deep cultural divisions. Many Americans clung fiercely to traditional religious values, fearing that urban progress threatened morality and faith. Into this tension stepped Tennessee's Butler Act, passed in March 1925, making it illegal to teach human evolution in public schools. Legislators claimed Darwin's theory contradicted the biblical account of creation, warning that abandoning scripture would unleash moral chaos. To them, defending Genesis was defending civilization itself. Yet across universities and urban centers, scientists and freethinkers saw this law as dangerous censorship. They believed science and education must remain free from religious control. These opposing forces were set on a collision course, and the Scopes trial would become the arena where they would meet head-on. Chapter 2. The Spark in Dayton. Dayton was a sleepy industrial town with little more than a courthouse, a few factories, and a tight-knit community. When the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, announced it would defend anyone willing to challenge the Butler Act, local business leaders saw opportunity. They wanted Dayton on the map. They approached John T. Scopes, a mild, well-liked science teacher and football coach, asking if he'd be willing to be the test case. Scopes admitted he had likely taught from a textbook containing Darwin's theory and agreed to stand trial. Overnight, this small-town dispute became national news. Newspapers across the country framed it as a monumental battle. Science versus God, Bible versus biology. Monkey trial begins. By the time the trial opened, Dayton had transformed into a media circus, swarming with reporters, vendors, and curious spectators. Chapter 3. Enter the Giants. The trial drew two of the most famous figures in America to Dayton. For the prosecution came William Jennings Bryan, a three-time presidential candidate, celebrated orator, and passionate defender of biblical literalism. To Bryan, teaching evolution was not just wrong, it was dangerous. On the defense stood Clarence Darrow, America's most famous attorney and an outspoken agnostic. Darrow had defended anarchists, union leaders, and murderers. But here he saw a greater cause: protecting intellectual freedom and preventing religious control over education. Bryan and Darrow represented more than lawyers. They embodied two Americas. Bryan stood for faith, morality, and traditionalism. Darrow championed reason, skepticism, and science. Their confrontation would turn the courtroom into a stage and America into an audience. Chapter 4. Dayton becomes a circus. By the trial's opening day, Dayton was unrecognizable. Street vendors sold monkey-themed hats and souvenirs, circus tents offered sideshows, and preachers delivered fiery sermons from makeshift pulpits. The town buzzed with an energy unlike anything it had ever seen. Inside the courtroom, the heat was suffocating. Crowds packed the gallery, straining to hear every word. Journalists from New York to London filed stories that captured the unfolding national drama. The trial wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was theater. Every statement, every objection, every witness became headlines. Dayton had become the center of the modern world's struggle over truth and belief. Chapter 5. Clash over the textbooks. Central to the trial was the textbook Civic Biology by George William Hunter, used by Scopes in class. It presented Darwin's theory of evolution alongside the biblical account of creation, treating both as competing explanations for human origins. The prosecution argued that by teaching Darwin, Scopes had directly violated state law. To them, the case was simple. Scopes had broken the law and must face punishment. But Darrow saw an opportunity to attack the law itself. He argued the Butler Act was unconstitutional, claiming it imposed religious dogma in public education. His goal wasn't just to save Scopes, it was to challenge the boundaries between church and state. Chapter 6. Science on Trial. Darrow attempted to bring leading scientists to testify about evolution, but Judge John Ralston ruled their testimony irrelevant, arguing the law itself, not the validity of evolution, was on trial. Frustrated but undeterred, Darrow turned to strategy. If he couldn't argue for science, he would instead challenge religion. He aimed to expose contradictions within literal interpretations of the Bible and force the prosecution to defend its beliefs under scrutiny. The courtroom was about to witness one of the most dramatic confrontations in American legal history, and the world was watching. Chapter 7. Darrow versus Bryan. On July 20th, 1925, in a move that stunned observers, Darrow called William Jennings Bryan to the witness stand as an expert on the Bible. The air grew electric as reporters leaned forward, pencils ready. Darrow questioned Bryan on Genesis, miracles, and the age of the earth, pressing him to defend a literal interpretation of Scripture. The exchange was tense, heated, and at times humiliating. Bryan struggled under Darrow's relentless questioning, revealing contradictions that rippled through the packed courtroom. For many Americans, this was the turning point. It wasn't just about Scopes anymore. It was about whether ancient scripture should dictate modern education. Chapter 8. The Verdict. After 8 days of fiery debate, the jury deliberated for just 9 minutes. Their verdict: guilty. Scopes was fined $100, a symbolic punishment. But Darrow's real goal had never been to win the case. Instead, he sought to expose the flaws in the Butler Act and ignite a national conversation. In that, he succeeded. Across the country, newspapers painted Darrow as a champion of progress and Bryan as the face of outdated traditionalism. Though Scopes lost, the trial marked a cultural shift. The battle lines between science and religion were now firmly drawn. Chapter 9. Bryan's Tragic End. Just 5 days after the trial ended, William Jennings Bryan died in his sleep in Dayton. The strain of the courtroom battles and the public ridicule had taken their toll. To many of his supporters, Bryan died a martyr for faith, standing firm against modernism until his last breath. To others, his downfall symbolized the decline of religious authority in shaping public education. Bryan's death cemented the trial's place in history, turning him into both a hero and a tragic figure, depending on which side of the divide you stood. Chapter 10. Scopes. Quiet life after the trial, John Scopes faded from the headlines. He left Dayton, earned a degree in geology, and spent much of his life working quietly in the oil industry. Though he had become the central figure in a national drama, Scopes himself never sought fame. In later interviews, he expressed no regrets, proud to have played a role in challenging unjust laws. His modest life contrasted sharply with the monumental consequences of the trial that bore his name. Chapter 11. The Media's Triumph. The Scopes trial was one of the first U.S. trials to become a media spectacle. Journalists from across the world turned Dayton into the center of modern debate. Radio broadcasts brought courtroom updates to millions. H.L. Mencken, a famous journalist, mocked Bryan as a Bible Belt warrior, framing the trial as a battle between backward rural America and enlightened urban modernity. The media's portrayal deeply shaped public opinion, ensuring the Scopes trial would be remembered as more than just a legal proceeding. It became a symbol of cultural struggle. Chapter 12. A law that outlived the trial. Despite the controversy, the Butler Act remained on Tennessee's books for over 40 years, not repealed until 1967. For decades, educators across the South avoided teaching evolution to sidestep conflict. The legacy of the trial haunted classrooms, where teachers feared crossing legal and cultural lines. Meanwhile, advocacy groups fought to protect scientific education nationwide. The clash between personal faith and public education was far from resolved. It had only begun. Chapter 13. Seeds of the Culture Wars. The Scopes trial planted the seeds of what we now call America's culture wars. It represented the growing divide between those who viewed science and religion as incompatible and those seeking a way to reconcile the two. These debates spilled into politics, shaping school board battles, textbook controversies, and even Supreme Court decisions. Nearly a century later, the echoes of Dayton still reverberate, influencing national debates on education, morality, and truth. Chapter 14. Lessons for Today. The trial remains deeply relevant in today's polarized world. Questions about what should be taught in schools, whose values dominate, and who decides truth continue to stir passionate arguments. From climate change to reproductive rights, the struggle over facts versus beliefs persists. The Scopes trial reminds us that education is never just about knowledge. It's about power. Its lessons endure, warning us of the dangers of letting ideology silence inquiry. Chapter 15. The Trial That Never Ends. Almost a century later, the Scopes trial still feels unfinished. Its themes, science versus faith, tradition versus progress, remain central to America's identity. Dayton, once a quiet town, became a symbol of the nation's internal battles. The courtroom drama may have ended, but the cultural struggle it ignited continues across classrooms, courts, and legislatures. The trial wasn't just about Darwin or Genesis. It was about who gets to define truth in a changing world. The Scopes trial of 1925 wasn't just a clash between two lawyers, two ideas, or even two worldviews. It was a moment when America looked in the mirror and asked itself, what kind of nation do we want to be? If you found this deep dive fascinating, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for more powerful stories from history that continue to shape our world today.